We believe he is the killer. We believe we have him.
The alleged Gilgo Beach killer is now behind bars, according to Suffolk County Sheriff Toulon Jr. In a one-on-one interview with Law&Crime Network, Toulon says he believes Rex Heuermann is responsible for the serial murders that plagued his jurisdiction for years.
One of the things that we realized pretty quickly was that we thought that we had the person. I think when we started looking at the evidence that we were starting to gather against him, we realized pretty quickly.
In the interview, Toulon provided new details in the murder case, revealing two former Suffolk County inmates had a close call with the accused serial killer, who officials say reached out to escorts in the weeks leading up to his arrest.
There were two persons in our custody that he had actually reached out to, but never actually made any physical contact. Called them by cell phone, spoke to them, but that was as far as it went.
Last week, officials announced the arrest of 59-year-old Rex Heuermann, who they say is responsible for at least 3 of the Long Island serial murders dating back to 2010.
I'm standing here with my law enforcement partners in the Gilgo Task Force to announce the indictment of defendant Rex Andrew Heuermann, 59 years of age.
In all, 11 sets of remains have been recovered in the Gilgo Beach area of Suffolk County, New York. Right now, Heuermann faces charges in the murders of Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, who were working as escorts at the time of their murders. But Toulon tells Law&Crime Network Heuermann could soon face charges in the murder of additional victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes.
There are certain times where we have evidence, but evidence to be brought to court to be able to charge someone and hold someone for a crime is a little different. So we want to make sure, and the district attorney and the police commissioner have been very methodical in our approach in addressing this and wanting to make sure that we were pretty concrete with everything that we presented to the courts, that we can hold this one and there was no technicalities.
Toulon credits a multi-department task force comprised of officials from the Suffolk County Police Department, Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, New York State Police, and the FBI with tracking down Heuermann and gathering an abundance of evidence against him.
But I can tell you that, each part of the task force brought a different piece to what we were collectively doing together. And so I think that was probably the success and the expediency of how a suspect was arrested and in custody right now.
After the first sets of remains were discovered more than a decade ago, Toulon says a task force was established but quickly disbanded.
There was a task force with the FBI on it, joint with the Suffolk County Police Department. And for reasons that I don't understand, the FBI was removed from that task force. And clearly the case went stagnant for so many years until the current district attorney, the current police commissioner, myself, and also the New York State Police and the FBI were able to work together collegiately to really make sure that we can do our best to really solve this case and at least bring a suspect into custody.
When a new task force was created in February 2022, Toulon says they weren't sure what to expect.
We didn't know what we were walking into at the time. But more importantly, how can we solve this now?
But just weeks after the task force came together for the first time, investigators identified Heuermann as a prime suspect in the case.
One of the things that we realized pretty quickly was that we thought that we had the person. I think when we started looking at the evidence that we were starting to gather against him, we realized pretty quickly. So the biggest thing that we needed to do was really to be able to go to a court of law and say that this is the reason why, with the evidence that we have, we've arrested Rex Heuermann, and we believe that he is the Gilgo killer in at least 3 of the murders.
But it was more than a year before Heuermann was taken into custody.
That took a lot of time. That's not something, this isn't a Law and Order TV show where it's going to be solved in an hour. This took many, many hours, many different agencies that had to learn how to talk together to see what valuable pieces of information could be gathered by each agency that could be part of this entire investigation.
The investigation took so long, partly because of the large amount of vital evidence gathered. Court documents show more than 300 subpoenas, search warrants, and other legal processes were used to collect evidence in the case.
There have been many search warrants that have been executed, which could hopefully help us lead us to more evidence in the three that he's currently under what he's charged for this arrest, the one that's pending, and if there's any other connection to any other murders, we will then be able to charge him on those also.
Speaking to national news outlets, the Suffolk County Police Commissioner said investigators found an arsenal in a vault of Heuermann's basement, complete with more than 200 guns. Other news outlets report investigators retrieved a life-size doll, the portrait of a woman with a bruised face, and Playboy magazines. Toulon says he can't comment on the items recovered from Heuermann's home because the investigation is still ongoing.
All of that is still speculative and really has not come into play where we're looking at, the evidence coming out still has to be examined from a forensic perspective.
But of the items collected during the investigation, Toulon says the recovery of Heuermann's DNA is invaluable to the case.
And once we were able to get some DNA evidence, which we were able to get off the pizza crust, off that and the box, pretty much solidified that we actually had the right person.
According to court documents, investigators recovered a pizza box Heuermann threw away in January 2023. The Suffolk County Crime Lab analyzed a piece of leftover crust, connecting it to Heuermann. Investigators also found hairs, likely belonging to both Heuermann and his wife, on the bodies of multiple victims. Officials also confirm his wife was out of the tri-state area when multiple murders were committed.
There is a possibility of transference if he hugged his wife and a piece of her hair was to get on his clothing, and that happened to be the clothing he used when he committed the murder. It just creates the higher probability that he is the killer, because if his wife is out of the country on the days that the crimes were committed and her DNA is at the crime scene, which can only be attributed to him with his DNA also, makes it more probable that he is obviously the most clear suspect in this case.
In addition to the DNA collection, Toulon says Heuermann's use of burner phones stood out immediately.
There was a box created in that Massapequa area where the phone calls were going to sex workers. Then we were able to look at a second box and where his employment was, and we're still getting those same sex workers, the same burner phones. And so now we know that we're on a good lead.
Officials say Heuermann used fake names, email accounts, and burner phones as a means of contacting his victims. On multiple occasions, investigators used his American Express records to show he was in the same location as multiple of the burner phones when they were used to contact victims. But he reached out to potential victims too,
that are victims of human trafficking, and asking them. We did come across two individuals that he actually reached out to by phone. There are various social media platforms that sex workers use to communicate with each other.
In the years leading up to Heuermann's arrest, Toulon reveals the alleged killer reached out to multiple women in regards to sex trafficking. He says the information was gathered when two women who had previously been in touch with Heuermann were booked into the Suffolk County Jail.
If a John was to give them a very good tip, they can put that and they'll put the phone number of the John. This way, when that phone number, when that John tries to reach out to another sex worker, they know that phone number, that particular individual gives a good tip. If someone was extremely aggressive, if someone was abusive, that's how they communicate. And so these are some of the things that we were able to uncover inside of our facilities, working with the victims of human trafficking. There were two persons in our custody that he had actually reached out to, but never actually made any physical contact. Called them by cell phone, spoke to them, but that was as far as it went.
Toulon says this information was used as evidence in Heuermann's arrest. When Law&Crime Network reached out to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office for more information about the former inmates and a timetable of their relationships with Heuermann, officials said the information could not be released as the investigation is still ongoing and either former inmate could play a part in future court proceedings. In the months leading up to his arrest, Toulon says Heuermann continued to look up escorts.
We do know that he was frequenting sex workers very close to when he was arrested. So, this is someone that really has some depravity in his being.
Toulon says he's seen Heuermann twice since his arrest, once in the Suffolk County Jail and the other at Heuermann's arraignment.
At the arraignment, from what I saw, was someone I didn't see any contriteness or any emotion. He did what he was told by the court officers. After the judge had remanded him to the custody of the sheriff's office, he then went back. He was processed by the court officers and then transferred over to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, where we have him in a housing area under different precautions that we may have than with other incarcerated individuals.
Inside the Suffolk County Jail, Toulon confirms Heuermann is being held on suicide watch.
Anyone that comes in with any type of notoriety, especially if it's media worthy and the heinousness of the crimes that he's being accused, we would want to put them in a separate area because we wouldn't want anything to happen. We want justice to be served in the courts, not in the jails. So we do have staff videotape. We want to make sure that everything is done to make sure that this individual is brought to justice. He is under suicide watch, but that's under our mental health. They're not employees of the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office. And so if he was to stay on a suicide.
When asked whether there is another suspect in the case, Toulon had this to say.
Personally, at this point, with all the evidence that we have, no. I believe that we have the suspect in custody.
He says it was a, quote, sigh of relief for the community when Heuermann's arrest was announced.
So not only for the victims, but, the victim family members, because they're the survivors that have lived through this for 13 years, basically, some of them, where there's been no reports of their loved one. There's been no progress on the case. And there was a huge, huge collective sigh of relief Thursday when he was brought into custody, Friday at arraignment, Friday when we held our press conference, that we can all just say, you know what, we're going to continue to fight for these victims, regardless of their status, regardless of what people think of them. They were human beings. They were sisters, they were daughters, they were aunts. And we want to make sure that we could bring them, the individual, to justice.
For families who have not yet received closure, Toulon says the investigation is still underway and could yield more charges against Heuermann.
One thing I can tell those family members is that we're still going to be relentless in the pursuit of bringing justice to them and their loved ones that have perished. This isn't something where we're resting on our laurels and said, we got 3, possibly 4, and we're good. No, we're going to keep pushing and seeing where this investigation takes us. We don't want to lead the investigation. We want the investigation to lead us.
Heuermann pleaded not guilty to all charges and is due back in court on August 1st. Anyone with more information about this ongoing case is asked to contact the Suffolk County Crime Stoppers. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.